morning. As was mentioned earlier, John Kerr, my father-in-law, don't hold that against me. No. Married his wife Jessica, who's sitting right over here too. I'm glad to be here this morning, but just to back up a second, we're visiting family. Our nephew graduated from high school, and we're here for a party for him and to spend time visiting with family. Earlier in the week, I got a text from John. I was in the middle of something at the time, and I got the message over my watch. Didn't have my phone on me. And it said, I have a question. Would you be able to lead singing for us this weekend? Because they knew that we were coming, and I enjoyed doing that. And I didn't respond because I was doing something. And when I forgot about it, an hour later, I hear a phone call, John Kerr, like, oh no. He's going to think I ignored him, and I answered the phone, prepared, like, I'm going to get a song list together, I'd love to. And he said, well, I might have another opportunity for you. I might have mentioned your name to some folks here close by. Would you be willing or interested in sharing a message with them on Sunday morning? And that's what brings us here. Is where we are here this morning. So again, I thank you for this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it this week and sharing this message. So just as an introduction to this sermon, again, my name is Adam Yonley. I don't believe I know hardly any of you. I do know Christian. I've met him and spoken with him before, and Mike, who is not here. But I'll say up front that this lesson is going to be based largely in an experience that I had, that I encountered, that I trained for late last year. I had trained for an Ironman triathlon, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about what that entailed, what my experiences were with that before relating it to some spiritual concepts. But with the Ironman triathlon, we begin by swimming 2.5 miles, and then you ride a bike for 112 miles, and then you finish with a marathon, a 26.2 mile run. Just in case you didn't have enough fun in the first two things, you get to wrap it up with that. So a little bit of what it took to train to be able to do something like that. I would spend in the months leading up to that race about 12 hours a week in training, about 30 plus miles of running, 70-ish miles of cycling, and about 5,000 or so yards of swimming every single week. So it was very taxing. It was very time-consuming, as you can ask my wife. It took a lot of time. She was very patience, not even enough of a word, to gracious to allow me to even train and put in those sort of hours. So a question that some of you are probably thinking now and that some have asked me is why? Why would you even consider attempting something like that? And number one is, well, maybe because I can. I don't mean that to seem arrogant, but I'm in enough health, I'm in enough shape to be able to do something like that in that part of my life, and I wanted to strive to try to do that. I was thankful even to be able to consider something like that as a possibility, but that's not the main reason why. I'm sure maybe it's partly to set the bar high, just to see if I can reach that goal, to see if I can attain it. To reach for something that I was just curious after the fact, how many of the world's population has completed an Ironman triathlon, and it was 0.0005% of the world's population. So again, you come to that question though, why? What makes somebody want to do something like that? And you're going to hear this quote. I have a short video and a little bit later in the lesson. You're going to hear this quote, but we're so much more capable than we're willing to give ourselves credit for. Not just for a physical feat like this, but in every aspect of our life, we are much more capable than we're willing to admit at times. And I don't want to, my goal is not to try to impress anybody by talking about what I was able to accomplish in this Ironman journey. What I hope you might consider, I'm not wrapping the lesson up right now already, but just to get your minds wrapped around the topic and what we're going to be discussing, I want you to at least consider taking a step back and evaluating your own life. What am I capable of? Not necessarily a physical race, but in my life, what are some areas of my life where I might be able to reach out to somebody else or step outside of my comfort zone and improve my own life and perhaps reach somebody else in the process? What can I accomplish knowing that at times I will fail or that we will fail, but still pursuing those goals, whatever they may be? And most importantly, are we glorifying God throughout the process of whatever that happens, however that applies to you and your life? You know, the entire reason that I might have trained months for this race and attempted the race is so that I would be given an opportunity to stand before you all here this morning and share that experience and share a correlative message, spiritual message to go along with that. Maybe that's the reason. I have done that a couple other times too. And if that's the reason, I guess you all should probably listen very intently to what I'm saying, right? There's no pressure on me if that's the whole reason that I went through that experience. But with that, that's not the right thing. Here we go. With that, I'm going to pop this up on the screen for a second as we, again, visit that topic. Why on earth would a sermon be titled Death by 1,000 Stings? You probably had no idea what direction that was going to go. I'm just going to leave this here for a second as I spend just a few minutes here talking about the race, each of the disciplines, and my experience with that race, and then we'll apply those experiences a little bit later in the lesson. An Ironman triathlon begins with the swim, and that is by far my personal weakest of the three disciplines, something I was not looking forward to. I knew I could swim 2.5 miles, but there were some added obstacles in this, in that I had to travel to Maryland along the Chesapeake Bay, close to the Chesapeake Bay for this race. And I had never trained in salt water, or in this case it was more of a brackish water, but it's still a lot more salinity than a swimming pool at the local YMCA. But on top of that, we had an added little perk, benefit. These are the wrong words. There were hundreds of thousands of jellyfish that had moved into the bay that at the time of the year, I believe it was in September, but I always get that, it was in September, right? At that time of the year, the jellyfish that usually move into the bay typically have moved out. But because they hadn't gotten much rain and whatever weather conditions led to this, the jellyfish had camped out and they had not moved out of the water. And they were going to continue with the race. So we did. So let's add in those tens or hundreds of thousands of jellyfish. Now, it's not these big man-o'-wars that might be going through your mind right now. It's a little bay nettle jellyfish. But there were clouds of them and still not a pleasant thought going into the race that we were going to have to swim through those jellyfish. To give you an example of what exactly they were, you can see that well enough there. This is a picture taken of the race morning. It might be difficult to see, but do you see all those little white splotches all over the place? Those are jellyfish, and that's what we were swimming through. I have a couple more pictures here. Now, the picture on your left, that's not taken, that's just one that I pulled off of the internet. The picture on the top right was actually taken that race morning by another participant of the race, and I kind of borrowed their image. But that gives you an example of what it was that we had to deal with. I did wear a wetsuit at the time, which covered a lot of my body and protected me from the stings of the jellyfish. But my arms and hands were exposed, my feet, my neck, my face, all these things were exposed. And when I started out swimming, it wasn't too bad. And I thought, no, I didn't know what to expect. I was very concerned that we were going to be swimming through those jellyfish. And then I started feeling a little bit of a sting. You've gotten friction burns before, right? You know what that feels like. And if you get a friction burn, it gets wet, how that stings. That's the best that I can describe what it felt like. And in short, over the course of the race, I stopped counting, but I was stung probably a couple dozen times to where it would begin to sting, and it was not as big of a deal as I thought it was going to be. That sting that would just kind of come, and then it would go away, and then it would come back, and then it would go away. I had a tentacle. The sting comes from the barbs in our tentacles. I had one stuck under my watch. I had one in my mouth at the time, which fortunately somehow did not sting me. This sounds very pleasant, doesn't it? Again, you're probably asking that question, what in the world's wrong with this guy? But And I'll talk a little bit more about that later too, and how those stings continued to come back and then disappear throughout the rest of the race. Really, on the bike ride, they would begin to come back and then they would fade. And you might be able to again see why this is titled "Death by 1,000 Stings," and we will apply that too. But I was reminded for several hours after the swim intermittently of those stings. I'll move on to the bike ride though. That's me coming out of the water after the swim, and I was very happy to get out of that water. I can definitely say that. And perhaps the jellyfish were a little bit of a blessing in that I came out of the water about 25 minutes faster than I anticipated it. I swam the fastest of my life during that swim. So, hey, a great time, right? And I was very happy, as you can see, to get out of the water. But I'm going to move on to the bike ride now. Right after the swim, I hopped on the bike, and the bike course was really beautiful. I couldn't have chosen a better place to ride a bike, a better race to ride a bike than for those 112 miles. We rode along the river there. It's called the Chop Tank River. I knew it was called the Chop Tank, and I still chose to get in it with a bunch of jellyfish. There's maybe something not right here, but I was right there along with hundreds of other people doing the same thing, actually a little over 1,000, I believe. But we rode along the river. We rode through a national wildlife refuge. We rode through several marshes and little fishing villages along the way, and it was a great experience. And everything was really going great on the bike until about mile 80. That's quite a ways in, but when I got to mile 80, their aid station, throughout the course, there were places set up with Gatorade, with water, with nutrition, and things that might help you along the way, because when you're burning thousands and thousands and over 10,000 calories, you have to continuously refuel yourself. You have to constantly drink. And I had all that planned out. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to data and things like that. So I had my nutrition and everything planned out. I practiced it. And I ran out of water. I was depending on them to refill my waters. And I get to mile 80 and they had run out of water. I'm thinking, oh no, this might be the beginning of the end if I begin to get dehydrated and cramping up. And it presented some challenges, but I got through that. But there was no water at mile 80. I think it was a mile 100 whenever I was able, or close to it, when I was able to get to another water station. Now, the best part of the bike ride, though, was the finish of the ride. Not because I'm finally off of the bike after swimming 2.5 miles, after riding 112 miles, but it's because at the finish, Jessica was waiting there for me, and she was cheering for me. And you're sitting there thinking, that's probably very encouraging. No wonder that's your favorite part of the race. But to get a better understanding of just how the magnitude of how much I was encouraged by her being there, I drove from our house in Willard, Ohio to Cambridge, Maryland, because I had a bicycle. I had other gear to take with me. I wasn't going to fly over somewhere like that, so I drove ahead of time, and she stayed home. She came out later because we have a couple of girls, and she's working, and we had family members come over and help out with that while I was gone. But the plan was for me to drive out, because I had to be there a couple of days early for the race, and then she was going to fly out and join me at the race site, because after this Ironman, whether I finished or not, it was going to be very difficult, I anticipated, for me to drive those 8+ hours back to Ohio again. So she was going to fly out the day before the race. So I'm talking to her, and it was time. It was the day before the race, and she got on her airplane. She's getting ready to take off, and the plane breaks. There's like the tow hitch or something on the plane actually broke, and it was a later flight. So they canceled that flight. They couldn't get on another one. She couldn't get on another flight until the next morning, the race morning. My race started at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning. So when I started my race, I had no idea when she was going to get there, if ultimately she was going to get there, how she was going to get from the airport and navigate to the race site. All these things were going through my mind, not knowing if she's ever even going to be able to show up there. So to see her at that bike finish was incredible. For me, it was a great encouragement. And even though I was completely wet, I was covered in sweat, she didn't complain about a big hug there at the finish line either. And that was a nice jolt that I needed at the time. So there's the bike, and I'll move on to the run portion of the Ironman. And running has always been my strong point. I have always been a runner, and I was looking forward to getting off the bike and running. And there were some challenges, of course, after those sort of hours that were put in. But when the run began, it started to get very hot and very humid there in Cambridge. And I had to slow down a little bit more than I anticipated. But it was a 26-mile course, and it was an out and back, out and back. I believe it was 5 times back and forth that we went, which is great because we had ready access to the water and the nutrition, and the crowds there were incredible. It was filled with spectators cheering you on in such a short distance everywhere that you went. So that also was very encouraging. We're going to talk about that too later. And you probably can't tell this yet, and you don't really know me very well, but I like to talk to people. And even while running, I usually run by myself, but I love running with somebody else, and I will talk the entire time. And fortunately, most of the other racers there felt the same way. I didn't know if at that point everybody else would be, somebody shut this guy up. And like, I'm trying to focus, I'm trying to survive here, and he won't stop talking my ear off. But I had some incredible conversations because people from all over the world had flown in for this race. I had conversations with people from Canada, not all that far away, right, our neighbors, but I spoke with people from Aruba, from India, from Colombia, from Australia, from Britain, and from all over the place. And that was really an incredible experience that we were sharing the same experience, but also motivating and getting to know each other through that process. So it was incredible to finally finish the race. And I'll get to this in a second. After I turned the final corner, there's a red carpet down and everything too, because apparently after a race like that, you've earned a red carpet finish. So after turning the final corner of that final marathon section, I was met really by hundreds of cheering people. Even though it was later at night, 10, 11, I have no idea of a concept of time at the time. But it was dark and there were people cheering, just lining that red carpet. And all of my training and 14 hours of racing came to a conclusion in that moment, in that very instant. And I took a moment really just take it all in. The stadium lights and everything, it was all incredible, loud music playing. So when I took all that in, I took my hat off too, and I just spun around taking it all in, not knowing that I was going to look ridiculous doing so, that there would be a finished video and pictures and everything, and now forever, for the rest of my life, my wife, our daughters, is going to be able to reference that as my famous spin twirl. Kind of a ballet thing, I guess, I don't know, but I actually have a video here of that finish, and you can see that spin twirl that I will now forever live up to. So,
Christian Laos, you are an Ironman, Christian. This is Adam Yonley. Adam, you did it.
Here it comes.
You are an Ironman.
Wonderful, huh? I was excited, and just being in that moment was incredible, but I will love that spin twirl forever. That was the brief summary. I've been speaking for a little while here, and that was the brief version of my journey from start to the finish of an Ironman race. I wanted you really to be able to grasp the whole picture of that experience before we really get into the meat of the lesson this morning, so that we can draw on some of those moments and address, again, why in the world this lesson is called Death by a Thousand Stings. So as I already mentioned, those jellyfish stings were irritating at first. They were persistent, they were continuous while I was in the water and when I got out of the water. As one sting would fade, another would start. And for hours and hours after that, the same thing would happen. It would continue to nag while on the bike ride especially. And I wanted to take now a moment to draw on that and point out that Satan persistently challenges us as Christians. And Satan will challenge us every single moment of our lives, whether we realize it in any particular instant or not. A few scriptures that we can reference, drawing from example that Christ lived, that he set for us with this thought that Satan persistently challenges us. The first one here is that when we have a great spiritual experience, after maybe we're baptized and begin walking in that Christian life, any great spiritual experience that we live throughout our life, Satan's going to be there waiting. Matthew chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, and moving on to chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, "And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.' Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil." Immediately, right? Like right after that, Satan is not going to miss a step, and it's going to be the same for us throughout our lifetime. Another scripture here, when we note that when we're physically and emotionally vulnerable, when we're at the lowest of lows, or just going through some challenge in our life, Satan is going to challenge us in those moments. Matthew chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, Jesus fasted for 40 days, being tempted by the devil, and he ate nothing during those days, and when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." I would think that Jesus was pretty low at the time physically, right? And we see how Satan, and we know how he was tempting Jesus, and we know we're not going to go into all the responses that Jesus had. We know that he responded very well. He quoted scripture and responded to Satan and all those challenges. But I just wanted to point out and show here that fact that Satan challenges us. One more point here regarding this fact is that Satan comes back and he attacks again and again and again, just like those jellyfish stings that I encountered in the water to my swim. Yeah, they were a little rough at the time. They were stinging. They were causing pain and discomfort at the time, but then they went away. Later on the bike ride, they would come back, then they would go away. They would come back and just nag on us. And really, that could have broken me down mentally, thinking, it did a little bit. It made me think, is this going to continue to happen? Is it going to get worse? Am I going to react to it? I had those constant reminders. And just like that, Jesus experienced things. Luke chapter 4 and verse 13, "And when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him forever," for the rest of his time here on earth, right? No, it says he departed from him until an opportune time, until another moment that Satan can challenge and Satan can attack, and that same thing applies to us too. So given these things, knowing that Satan is going to persistently challenge us throughout our lives, how do we navigate life's challenges when we're faced and with whatever challenges those might be? Well, one thing that we can do is that we can strengthen our relationship with God. We can focus on God's will for us instead of focusing solely on those challenges that we are facing. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 and 11, it says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil." Use every spiritual weapon that we have so that we can stand against Satan when he challenges us. So the first thing that we need to realize is that in our own strength, we're no match for the devil. We are no match for Satan if we're depending on ourselves and our own knowledge and or just thinking that, I'm strong enough to deal with this illness that I'm going through. I can do it. I know I can get through it. I'm strong enough. It's when we have that sort of thinking, and maybe we can get through things, a loss of family members, whatever it might be you're struggling with, but when we lean on God, how much better is that? Satan recognizes that God is your power base. That's where we derive our power from as Christians, is from God. So Satan's goal is to get between you and God in whatever way he can wedge himself in there. He tries to separate our heart from God and inspire confidence in ourselves instead of in God. And that can be easily done at times when we accomplish something, and that's great. I accomplished an Ironman finish, right? That means nothing in the end. But throughout our experiences in our lives, whatever accomplishes it might be a promotion at work, it might be whatever it is, how it applies to you personally, we are involved in that process of making that happen, but we don't want to forget about God and his role in every part of our life in those successes. If I focus on the fact, to go back to referencing the jellyfish again, if I focus on that fact that I was swimming with jellyfish, if I really focused on it continuously, I probably would not have made it through the swim. because for the entire swim, I would see these little things flowing right by, because your head's in the water when you're swimming. I would see these things go right by my goggles, just thinking, I'm just going to keep pushing forward, because if I stop, I'm done. And it ended up not being as bad as I thought it could be. But if I focused on just that fact that there were jellyfish all around, how much more challenging would that have been, and perhaps unsuccessful getting through it at the time. They were constantly passing by, like I said. If I narrowed my focus to that moment, I wouldn't have made it to the finish. But I continually look forward to that moment that I left the water behind, I got out of the water and could proceed with my race day. And we can apply that to ourselves. If we focus on the stings of the devil, he's going to win. Eventually, ultimately. If we focus solely on those challenges that we face in our lives, especially in those very, very difficult and challenging trials, Satan wins. If we focus on God's strength and His will for us, we can get through those difficult times, those difficult challenges. And often when we get through those challenges, when we're focused on God and we're leaning on Him and searching for His will in our challenging times of our lives, we will often get through it with a renewed strength of our own. I'm going to back up with one more experience here. I'll be truthful, this was not my first Ironman attempt. And my first one came a month prior to this up in Michigan, which was closer than Maryland for us to travel to. And without going into too many details of that, I was about halfway through the swim, and I must have gotten too far underneath somebody else, and I got kicked really hard in the back of the head. I had to stop swimming for a bit, got a little bit dizzy, and decided, okay, I think I'm over it. I'm going to push forward. And I finished that swim. And I got on the bike, and I was still a little fuzzy-minded. And it started to get a little bit better when I started the bike ride, until it started to get a whole lot worse. I started to feel sick at one point in time, and I was trying my hardest. I've got to finish. I'm going to keep pushing through and pushing and pushing. And I made it to about mile 100 before I had to pull out of the race. Halfway through, I stopped for medic attention, and the medics never showed up after 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes of resting, I thought, well, I feel a whole lot better now. I just needed a little bit of rest, right? So I got back on the bike, and I started. I was in last place of the however many people were there, maybe 100, 150 people, just trying to push through. So when I finally finished that race, Jess was able to find me out on the race course about mile maybe 90, 95, and she knew I was in bad shape. We talked about it. It sure seemed like I had a concussion. I had a mild concussion, most likely. And I said, just let me get to 100. When I get to mile 100, push forth and see how I feel. When I got to 100, she was waiting, and I pulled out of the race. I was done. I was kind of emotionally devastated to have trained so long to be able to have to stop my race at that mile mark at 100 and just be done for the day. Fast forward to this race in Cambridge, Maryland. When I was about like mile 98, I was thinking, I'm coming up on that point where I had to pull out of the race before. Mile 99, I could see mile 100 in the distance. There's a big sign that says 100 miles. And about 90 miles in, I was really starting to feel it. And I was getting discouraged. My legs were fading. I felt exhausted. I was slowing way down. People were passing me left and right. But when I saw that sign that said mile 100, something just clicked. And I remember that experience and everything I went through in that prior race. And when I passed that 100-mile sign, I flew past it. And it was just that strength that I gained, I guess, from that prior race, knowing, okay, I have now made it past where I struggled before. I have this renewed strength. And I wasn't intending to speed through those next 12 miles, but I passed 53 people approximately. I was actually counting after a while because I was curious. But I passed all of them on the bike ride through in those last 12 miles. There was a lot of excitement, I guess, and just because I reached that point where I had struggled before, and I was now blasting past it and overcoming that former struggle. We can apply that spiritually too whenever we are overcoming those challenges, whenever we're relying on God and He helps us through those struggles, and we come back even stronger because of that help that we have in Him. In our scripture that was read this morning, Paul likened his work with the Philippian church to running a race. And he mentions that all the way through verse 16 of what we read. But then there's this phrase. If we go to Philippians chapter 2, there it is, verses 12 and 13. It says, therefore, after he mentions all of those things and relating his experience to a race, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And I really love this verse. And something that I want to make sure when we read this verse is that we notice Paul is not telling us here that we have to work really hard to earn our salvation. That's not what he meant when he says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It's not our purpose or our goal to earn our salvation or to win forgiveness or to earn the love of God, because God has already offered those things to us, right? Through Christ sending his own Son here to live, to walk and live as we have, that his sacrifice on the cross. Now, God has offered forgiveness and love and all those things to us already. What Paul is saying is that we're called to take what we've been given in our relationship with God and work at deepening that relationship. Strengthen our relationship with him. Work hard not to earn our salvation, because that's impossible, but to demonstrate what that salvation means to each and every one of us by what we are doing with our lives. So I want to move on to one more point here this morning and talk about another concept of this race, something that really got me through the Ironman and that can really help us out a lot throughout our lives, and that is encouragement. I want to take a moment to, most of you probably don't know who Julie Moss is. Julie Moss, back in 1982, the year I was born, so a little while back, but in 1982, she was a college student. I forget where she attended actually, but it was a prestigious school. She was mastering in exercise physiology, and as part of her thesis, she decided this relatively new concept, this race called the Ironman Triathlon in Kona, Hawaii. At the time, it was pretty new. Not many people knew about it or attempted it. She thought, as a part of my thesis, I want to go try to run this Ironman race with very little training. I'm going to go see what it does to my body, and however it was that she was going to apply it to her thesis. And I'm going to show you a video in a second that shows you what that journey looked like. But actually, let me go ahead and just show you the struggle that she experienced within that race, and then talk to us a little bit about that. I'm going to move this over so you might be able to better hear it. But let's see. This is Julie, in current day, talking about that experience.
It was for me, and at a young age, to understand that we are capable of so much more than we think we are, and that sometimes we have to be completely broken down to find our strongest self. Keep on living means, to me, right here, right now, sending love to those people who are struggling, and to then keep finding a way in the midst of all this upheaval to live your best life every day. When you struggle to get to the finish line and you go through those valleys and those peaks, mostly it's the valleys that really educate you. It stays with you on a cellular level. It's muscular memory, it's cellular memory, it's spiritual memory. It will be with you forever. Every time you get into a situation that's going to test you, you will call back on those moments, and you will know the moments where you didn't give up, and you will know some moments where you did, and you'll know moments in between. But it's those moments where you found a way to stay with it, one foot in front of the other, or literally crawling to a finish line. You know that you have that forever, and it's something that will guide you, inform you, and I think really show you the best part of yourself for the rest of your life.
So just to talk just for a minute more about Julie, the lady who was favored to win the Ironman race that year, her name was Kathleen McCartney, and coming up on less than a mile to the finish line, Julie was 2 miles ahead of Kathleen McCartney at that time. So with less than a mile to go, it looks like she's going to pull off this incredible upset. This young college student writing her thesis on exercise physiology with little training coming to run the Kona Ironman triathlon. And about a half mile to go, you saw in the video that she started to fall down. She was getting severely dehydrated. Her body was completely breaking down. She wasn't all there mentally at the time either. She was very much struggling. And right before she finally finished, literally, as she mentioned, crawling across the finish line, a minute or two before that, Kathleen actually passed Julie and won the race. So she came in second place, which was still great, but it looked like she was going strong and she was going to win the race, and then she started to fall apart, as you saw there. And I'm sure it was very also discouraging at the time. I have a picture here. I'm not sure why this picture has some people marked out. You can kind of see feet in the background there. It looks like, actually it might be like the grass along the finish line, like their version of a finishing chute. But you see this little spot in the bottom left of the screen here? I can even point to it there. That's the finish line. And she's still trying, she's dragging herself to finish. And she had a lot of encouraging support. People were cheering for her, but nobody could help her. If anybody picked her up or touched her or helped her move forward in any way, she would be disqualified after all those long hours and all those accomplishments. So it was something that she had to do on her own. So just imagine how discouraging that had to be, how exhausting that would have had to have been. But she did receive encouragement from everybody, the thousands of people actually at the time, cheering her on, willing her across that finish line. And I really enjoyed that quote that she mentioned throughout that video when she said that we can send love to people who are struggling and keep finding a way to live your best life every day. When we think about that as Christians and how important it is to support each other and to encourage each other and how much we can benefit, especially in those challenging times in our life, from encouragement. The opposite of encouragement, discouragement, I experienced that in my first Ironman attempt. I mentioned I was in last place on the bike. Well, when you do something like that, timing companies put these chips on you. You go across a timing mat and a little reader tells you, it keeps track of your race. You're at this point, at this part of the race, and this point. And I was the last person. As I would cross one of those timing strips out on the race course, the timing company was there to rip it up right behind me. I saw it happening. I could hear it happening. I'm like, oh. And then they would zoom past me in their car and go to the next strip. I would cross that strip and hurry, we're working to get it up as fast as I could. And it's like, oh, that's just very much defeating. So I'm sure that didn't help either. But fast forward to the Ironman in Cambridge, Maryland. That was the race community of encouragement. I already mentioned it was a shorter out and back course. People were lining the streets from the time that I was on the run especially. Don't know what time that was, probably after noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The entire time people were cheering for us. From participants that were there were encouraging each other to the spectators, it was a totally different atmosphere. And I just remember this yesterday, that there was one point of the run that I was starting to wear down a little bit. Now, I wasn't feeling totally awful, maybe the halfway point, 13, 14 miles into the 26-mile run. And we rented a house that was right on the race course. So Jess was there. She was able to go in and out and come back out for when I would be crossing different lines. And I passed that point, passed in front of the house, and she cheered for me. She's like, come on, Adam, good job. And then suddenly, it sounded like hundreds of people started saying, yeah, they started cheering for Adam. It's like this big eruption. I'm like, oh, this is incredible. And then suddenly I felt a whole lot better. Had an extra pep in my step for the next probably hour, even because of that. Later I found out they knew a different Adam. And I think when they heard her say, hey, Adam, they're like, Adam, they even had signs that I didn't see at the time. They said, like, go Adam, or something like that. And I'm like, I didn't see that at the time. I thought they were cheering for me. So even though they weren't actually cheering for the correct Adam at the time, and that just elevated my mood, my mindset, I felt stronger. That encouragement was truly incredible, even if kind of misplaced. For me, it was awesome. One more example of that is there was a lady on the race course, and she was there from my first lap through and late morning, early afternoon. She was still there after midnight whenever I passed through, and when there were still some other competitors on the race course, I saw that she was still waiting there. She was waving her American flag She was just leaning against the guardrail in front of her house. Everybody that would go by, she would cheer for them. Hey, good job, keep it up, you've got this. Just constant words of encouragement. I didn't ask, but she was probably in her early 80s, sitting there against the guardrail all day long. From what I could tell, if she took breaks, I didn't see it because she was always there every single time that I passed. So on my last lap, I knew it was going to be my last time running past her. I wanted to stop for just a second and thank her for her constant encouragement for me and for every racer that passed her by throughout the day. And I let her know, thank you for this. It meant truly, I don't know how I would have felt if you wouldn't have been here seeing you and encouraging me this whole time. And guess what she said? She said, you're almost there. Keep it up. Keep going strong to the end. And I'm like, man, you are incredible. And that helps too. But just think of how encouraging she was. I'm sure for me to stand for 12 plus hours, I mean, that's going to wear me down just standing there. Somebody who is in her 80s, that's going to be difficult. But she was there to help people, to encourage along the way. One other thing that Julie mentioned is that sometimes we have to be completely broken down to find our strongest self. And she was talking about her race. She was talking about other times throughout her life that we struggle. But when we struggle to get to a finish line, no matter what that is, figuratively, literally, we grow as individuals. We grow as families and friends as we support each other in those peaks, and we give encouragement to each other in those valleys. And there were a lot of times during my race, and I promise we're coming toward a close now this morning, but there were times during the Ironman that I put a lot of faith in my training to see me through those times that I was really discouraged. I would tell myself, I put in the hours, I know that I can do this, and try to get myself to continue to push because of the confidence that I had in that training. I faced challenges during that 14-hour race day that were well beyond my control. The running out of water, other things that I haven't even mentioned. But in those moments, I could still focus on what I did know, and I could trust in my training and look forward to that moment that I ultimately finished the race and put all those struggles behind me. And it's really important to train to finish a race, especially one of the magnitude of an Ironman. But how much more important is it for us all to train for the moment that we finish our spiritual journey, when we cross that spiritual finish line, when what we do here on this earth no longer matters. We can no longer accomplish anything. We can no longer reach any family members or friends here on earth. How important is it for us to train for that moment, and how does it impact our lives now? Now, what are some things that we do now? We're here this morning. We're worshiping together. We can share our faith with each other, and we do that. We can wrestle those tough questions with each other, maybe that have very difficult answers, and have discussions about that. We can read Scripture and discuss it with our friends and our family members. We do it in Bible classes. We take communion together. We remember God's past acts and His future promises for us. By serving people in need, by stepping away from our own needs and focusing on others, and also continually working to strengthen our relationship with God. These are all things that we can focus on in strengthening our relationship while we have that opportunity. And so remember, in all of life's challenges, in all of Satan's persistence to come between us and God, with our relationship with God, that we're fighting for God's victory. We're not fighting for our own victory, for our own success. We're fighting for God's victory, and however we can allow Him to work through us throughout our lives. We already have victory over the devil. God provided that. We have that already. And he was soundly defeated at the cross, which we talked about this morning in a great Bible class. Jesus broke Satan's stranglehold on humanity when He died on the cross, and He became that perfect sacrifice for us that we would never, it's impossible for us to accomplish, but He did because of our sins. So let's continue to focus on Him. Let's continue to focus on God as we leave this morning, and focus on that relationship, and let's continue to support and encourage each other in our spiritual journeys as we look forward to finishing those journeys, not just for our own victory, but for God's victory and for that hope that we have to be with Him forever in heaven through Christ's sacrifice. So speaking of that sacrifice now, if you would like to put Christ on a baptism and begin that spiritual journey, you have every opportunity to do that here this morning. If you have any needs that we can help you with here this morning, please let those know. And as together, let's stand now and let's sing.